welcome to another episode of The Gray Stage. This is episode number 32. We're doing chapter number 16 in the book, The Gray Stage, authored by Greg Fernandez Jr. Right here, I'm holding it up. We're in chapter 16, the final chapter. For those of you following along in the book, we're on page 145. And we'll start really right there. We'll go through, read several paragraphs, discuss it, and then continue on. Once again, this is episode number 32 in this series. Starting on the top of page 145, Komel and her sister were born on a United States military base in Saudi Arabia. Once her father left his position with the U.S. military, Detective Jim Gummert reported, they returned to live in Pakistan, where her mother and father were originally born. So this is a good history in the background of the Alam family. This whole last chapter, it's basically 50 pages, Greg, of just kind of an overview. The book itself is done, but this kind of wraps everything together. Very good. The Alam family stayed in Pakistan until Komel was 17 years old, and then they moved to Texas. Komel then met David while attending Baylor University, a private Christian university in Waco, Texas. David Crowley grew up in Owatonna, Minnesota. David and Mitch Heil became best friends in 2000 while attending Owatonna High School. In 2004, David and Mitch joined the United States Army together on June 22nd. David's place of entry into active duty is listed as Fort Snelling in Minnesota. That's the big base here, or the big location here in the Twin Cities is Fort Snelling, Minnesota. It's a very large cemetery there too, a veterans cemetery, very large.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's almost on the scale of the one in Washington, D.C., Arlington.
Wow.
It's a very massive, people come from all over to see that cemetery. It's one of those perfect rows, of course, diagonal. It's a very respected cemetery.
That's where Fort Snelling, I guess, is where everybody goes from Minnesota if they were to join the Army.
I think they start off there. Yes, it's a big. It's near the airport as well, but it's the big base. It used to be the fort, when the Native Americans were living here back then. It's where the two rivers combine and converge. So it's a good vantage point there when there was fighting years ago in the Native Americans. Okay, so that's where he started from. According to Mitch Heil, both him and David were then sent to Fort Benning in Georgia for Army basic training. After completing basic combat training, David was sent to Germany. David Crowley served in the United States Army for a total of 5 years, 2 months, and 22 days, beginning January 22nd, 2004, ending September 13th, 2009. 3 years, 3 months, and 15 days of service were listed under the Foreign Service section of his release from active duty form DD 214. David's home of record at the time of entry into service was his dad's home in Owatonna, and he was released from service at the Fort Hood Army Base in Texas. According to Mitch Heil, Detective Tommy Booth reported David was first deployed to Iraq. David was in Iraq from November 2nd, 2005 to November 11th, 2006. While deployed in Iraq, Detective Booth continued, David had gone through a traumatic incident where an IED had blown up the Humvee that he was in. When the IED had blown up the Humvee, David had to save one of his teammates and lost several members of his team while over in Iraq.
So that could be kind of where the first instance of the PTSD thing kind of comes in, right? I mean, it kind of seems like Mitch is setting this up. Even though we know Mitch doesn't believe David had PTSD, people who read that could probably, I mean, as a casual person who's never served, I could read that and think, wow, okay, yeah, there's definitely trauma. Post-traumatic stress. It's definitely going to come from something like that.
Yeah, a major event like that, having to save one of his teammates, losing several others in the case, not good.
Do you remember David ever talking about this specific thing? This is really the only place that I remember hearing about this. David may have casually mentioned or generally mentioned it, but not as specific as what Mitch Heil is stating here.
I don't believe it was ever discussed at all until, after the bodies were discovered and the folks started bringing up this event. I think trying to tie it, trying to explain it away, trying to, this could be the reason that this happened. Still a traumatic event, whether he had PTSD or not. That would have been a traumatic event.
Right, and it's interesting that Detective Tommy Booth makes sure to put this in this report. Obviously, he probably talked with Mitch Heil. They probably talked about a lot of different things, but you can tell there's only certain things going into this,
Okay.
into Detective's report.
The following paragraph, it says, Islam is a religion of peace, David wrote in a Facebook group on February 7th, 2007. But where's the peace in trying to kill anyone who isn't a Muslim? They are not about love, they're about victory. Is Allah insisting that a good Muslim should murder people who are different? They have been brought up in a place where sectarian violence is simply a way of life and blindly follow their leaders into a violent religious frenzy. They fight for a God that is not behind what they do, but even more so, they fight for key political leaders who use the masses for their own ends, just as you guys are saying our government is doing to us. But if these statements are true, at least ours is geared towards peace and clarity, charity, not violence without end, end quote.
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting quote there, and this is from the PDF that you got, the big PDF, close to 500 pages,
Yep.
and not all of, but there's a lot of Facebook posts that David made in this Facebook group, and I forget the name of the actual group, but it seemed like it was a military group just for kind of soldiers and people like that. I don't know if it was a public group or a private group, but somehow the police got it, and there's tons of stuff that David talks about during this time and he's serving during this time. I thought that was fascinating too. I didn't know that you could do that. You could be serving and be on Facebook, but Facebook was a little different, I guess, back in 2007. I didn't get on Facebook till 2009, so I don't know what it was like back then.
That's very interesting. David has been to at least 11 countries. Quote, dude, I've killed people in service of my homeland, end quote. David wrote during a Facebook group discussion on February 6th, 2007, and have been to more countries than you have fingers, end quote.
I thought that was pretty interesting too, because this is his direct quotes talking about where he's been. So at least 11, because we all have 10 fingers. So I figured, well, at least 11 countries that he's been to there, which is pretty fascinating. And that was in a response to somebody who was kind of not belittling the war, but was probably somebody who was talking about stuff that maybe they didn't really know about. But if you want to read the proper context, I'm sure it's on your website, Dan, and it's a big 480-page document there, and there's just a lot of great stuff. I only put a few things in here. I couldn't put everything in there, but there's a lot of good back and forth that David is having, talking about his time as a soldier. And what's interesting is you can get a glimpse of his views back in 2007, and then you can kind of compare them to after he gets out of service, how things may have changed.
As a soldier on the ground, David wrote in the group discussions February 3rd, 2007, I have seen enormous resources put into the betterment of the general Iraqi populace, be it school installations or medical functions or whatever. After David's tour in Iraq, he was sent to Texas, where he hoped to wait out his term of service and leave the Army. That's when David met Kamel. 6 weeks after they met, David and Kamel were married. The paperwork was filed on May 14th, 2008, and the marriage was official 8 days later on May 22nd.
That's a pretty short time to me. I know I know people who they've met a couple weeks, they got married, and they're still married to this
Yeah.
very day. But to me, that always kind of stuck out to me because it's so rare, especially nowadays too. But I was just fascinated by 6 weeks, and that's it, and they're married, and that's pretty interesting to me in a good way, not in a
Yes.
bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Instead of being allowed to leave the army, David was stop lost, and that means involuntary extension of service, and shipped off to Afghanistan from June 26th, 2008 to June 11th, 2009. According to David's records, he was, quote, retained in service 449 days for the convenience of the government per U.S. Section Code 10 12305, end quote.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly what that means, but I put that in there because that is from the one sheet that you got that does show pretty much everything that I know about David's time of service is in this one one page PDF document that Dan Hennon got a long time ago in a
Is
galaxy
that the,
far, far away.
is that the DD 214
That is,
report? Yep.
yeah, the DD-214 report,
And
which I
people have
think is
asked us right from the beginning, you've got to get that because there was folks still who thought at one point that this whole thing was a hoax. He was some kind of intelligence officer, and this whole thing was a staged thing. They said you got to get that report to see what he actually was doing in the service. What was he up to? And and we got that, so that was good. Comel lived with her parents while David was in Afghanistan. Comel graduated from Baylor University with a degree in Bachelor of Science degree in Family and Consumer Sciences on May 15th, 2009. 2 months after David was released from active service, Rania Crowley was born. The daughter of David and Comel came into this world at 6:38 p.m. on August 6th, 2009. She weighed 5 pounds, 11 ounces, measuring 8 centimeters in length.
pretty small, right? Pretty small baby.
8 centimeters?
Is that wrong? It's pulled
I don't
from
believe
that
that's
one
right.
photo. Yeah, it's from that one photo.
Okay.
So I don't know. Maybe it's not right. But there is
Okay.
one of the crime. I think it's in the 464 photos, and it's the one where it shows her as a baby. And I just pulled whatever was on there. Hopefully I got it right. We'll have to double check that one though.
And maybe it was 18.
It could be. Yeah, it could be. We can go back and look at that. That's
Continuing
important.
on, it says David Comel and Rania Crowley moved to Minnesota shortly after David left the military. David Crowley and Mitch Heil then enrolled in the Minnesota School of Business together in 2009. The two men also started two businesses in 2009, Hothead Productions and Bullet Exchange. David
Yeah,
says,
so
quote,
they're right out of the service. They're just moving. They got the businesses going, and that's
this
pretty interesting too.
all went very quick.
Yeah,
It was very fluid time. My work with Hothead Productions, David wrote on his LinkedIn profile, included writer, director, post-production supervisor, composer, branding, marketing, musician, client relations, pre-production, storyboard artist, visual effects artist, logo design / animation, title animation, social media campaign manager, location shoots, camera operation, family headshot model, event photographer, and website design / content manager. We also tackled professional photography, doing events, family, headshots, product, and model / fashion. Lots of graphic artwork in this arena as well, end quote. So that was his LinkedIn page.
yeah, that's his LinkedIn, and that's the most current one. So I mean, I hope it kind of reading it now. I hope people don't think that that's what he wrote back in 2009. I'm not exactly sure when he wrote this or when this was last updated, but this is what his LinkedIn profile said, and you can go to it right now and see what it says. All this,
It's still out there, right?
it's still out there. Yeah.
Continuing on, it says David also explained the origins of Bullet Exchange. Quote, my partner Mitch Heil and I began the Bullet Exchange to service the Minneapolis film community's potential for realistically dressed and equipped military components in film. We provided authentic props and costuming services, as well as serving as prop master, armorer, range cadre, stunt choreographer, actor trainer, and military consultation for concept and script. I also was in charge of the company's marketing, client relations, and media/branding. The Bullet Exchange remains the only resource in the Midwest for authentic police and military equipment rentals specifically tailored for film and theater. So he started this business that was repurposing authentic equipment, police, law enforcement, SWAT gear, things like that. He was able to pick those things up and buy them, I think, and repurpose them and rent them out for scenes and things like that.
What was the whole film scene like back then? Do you know? I know in like in San Francisco, it was pretty big, the whole independent scene. What was the independent film scene like around this time, around 2009 ish to 2014?
What was it like? I don't know.
Yeah. I was very curious. Couldn't really find much, but I think every city, every major city probably has, you know, some type of a film presence. So it just kind of seems like I wonder why they started this. Was David and Mitch, were they looking at movies, local independent movies, and seeing, hey, they didn't get this right, or they're not holding the gun right, things like that. It just
I
makes me
think that they
curious.
were, Minneapolis is an artistic city, so it's got a lot of that going on there. So I think that Minnesota School of Business, where they went to this arena that they got into, as far as this degree that they got, was very good this way, and they were contacted and set up with a lot of people with contacts and networking. So I think that's how they got into the whole concept of doing this, and that was a great niche that they were able to get into because, like you say, the article says here there isn't anything that large in the Midwest that offers that much, and he had quite a bit of inventory, as we found, that was all in the basement of his house on Ramsdale Drive.
Yeah, and there was one quote of his teacher, one of his teachers that talked very highly of David Crowley too. I thought that was pretty interesting. That was pretty much it. I've only seen one or two quotes of people really talking positively, and it was David's film teacher.
And once again, he was a one-man show. He was doing all this himself, the business end of it, the production, and handling it. He was a one-man operation, basically able to do it all.
Yeah.
David then volunteered at the Pro, Progeria, Progeria Research Foundation as a language translator from October 2009 until May 2010. David assisted with, quote, translations of Western research documents to Urdu script for clinical use in Karachi.
That's pretty fascinating too, because languages, not just speaking, but translating some of this stuff. He must have learned a lot, either during his time of service, or maybe from his wife too, or from his wife's
Yeah,
family,
it's
possibly.
probably a combination of
Yeah,
all of it. It's very interesting.
within only a few years. You know, that takes a lot of brain power there.
Comel Crowley purchased a Springfield XD 40 caliber handgun, serial number US 163310, on July 25th, 2009. The purchase was made via check in the amount of $508.76 at the Gun Zone in Dallas, Texas. The same gun was later sold by David Crowley on June 17th, 2012, to someone named David Stark.
I never did figure out who David Stark was or what the relationship of that, but maybe it's not that important, right? A sale is a sale. It doesn't necessarily mean that
Yeah, and this
much,
gets
but
back to the Springfield 40 caliber, the same weapon, not the same weapon, but the same make and model of the weapon that was found at the scene where the bodies were
yeah.
discovered.
And I always found it interesting that it was purchased by Kamel, but David sold it. I don't know how that works. If they're married, maybe it's not that big of a deal, right? It's still legal, I guess. But I just found that kind of interesting too. Wow, okay, she buys it, and then he ends up selling it.
Continuing on, it says November 8th, 2009, David and Kamel completed the permit to carry a handgun course with Eric D. Pekaiser. Mr. Pekaiser is a certified firearms instructor for Quorum Security Inc. in Minnesota. Mr. Pekaiser was also featured in David's documentary Gray State, The Rise. So they both had, they were going through the training, they were getting their license, certifications, and they were doing all the right steps.
Was he in Eric Nelson's film? I mean, or was it just footage from that David Crowley had already recorded? Do you remember if he did any original footage for Eric Nelson's film, Mr. Eric Pekazer?
I don't know. I don't
I don't
believe
know
so.
either. Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't heard much about from him after David's death either. I don't know if he's made any public comments or not. I'm assuming at some point he may have posted something on Facebook, but I don't remember looking at anything. He's an interesting guy though.
Yes. The Gray State project began in November of 2010. The Gray State LLC was also created in 2010 by David Crowley and Mitch Heil. And see, these are these businesses now that they were starting and creating various businesses. According to a report by Detective Tommy Booth, Danny August Mason's, quote, involvement with Gray State and Crowley was strictly as an actor and as a friend, but had not been involved in any financing or was actually listed in any paperwork as a partner with Crowley and Heil. Even so, Danny Mason did help write the story of Gray State with David. Danny Mason met David through the Bullet Exchange. Mr. Mason once stated Bullet Exchange offered, quote, some of the best training an actor can receive, end quote. David gave Danny Mason a Beretta 92F handgun on August 10th, 2011.
Yeah, as a gift, right? That
Yep.
was a
As a gift. That's yep. So he gave it to him there. That's a gift, not a sale. But this is where Eric Pekaiser comes into play. Danny August Mason comes into play.
Who's just an actor. That's all. He's not. He makes it very clear to the police he's just an actor. Even though a couple months after David's death, he tries to take over the whole project, right? And
Yeah, he
change
filed
the
with the
name.
state secretary of the state of Minnesota a new company, filed for trademark, copyright, and things with the script to move forward as a business owner and running the show. Then he does tell police, though, every time he gets asked that he's nothing but an actor in the film and has no connection. That would be the police right there when they're asking those types of questions. They're trying to piece together motive and whatnot. And that's what they asked there. Now, he knew that question would be coming, so he was prepped, and his answer was to say, I'm certainly not anything on the business end. I'm not associated with the business at all. I'm just an actor in the film. So he said that right away, but we know that is a lie.
Right. It just reminds me of that famous line, "I'm just a patsy." For some reason, when he says "I'm just an actor," it always reminds me of that Oswald line.
Yes.
But also one last thing on that I think is that the like you were saying, we know that that's not true. The police know that too because they got the back and forth emails between David and Danny August Mason where they're talking about signing contracts and this and that, and it's like, well, if you're just an actor, why would you care? Just sign it off, right? Sign off these release forms so David could go and make this project happen. But there was a lot more to it. So I think once I read those, thank you again for getting those. But once I read those, the whole back and forth between David and Danny August Mason, it did change my view a lot on a lot of the things that Danny August Mason was saying. It's like, wow, if you're just an actor, what is with all of this legal stuff? And on the flip side, if David thought that Danny August Mason was just the actor, why was he going through this whole process to get Danny August Mason to sign those release forms too? So there's some questions. Was that just bad advice from David's lawyer? I don't know.
Well, when this whole thing started, Danny August Mason considered himself a co-founder of the project, part creator, and this was all part of his baby as well, as how he thought in his head that this was all his baby. David was helping out. But he started off by educating David and getting him up to speed on some of these topics because David Crowley wasn't well versed on it.
It's true.
And so that's this is all his baby, and they were going to do this together as a partnership and make it big. But you're right. When the police asked, he's nothing more than an actor. He didn't say partner. He didn't say co-founder, business partner, things like that.
I'm just a patsy. I'm just
Yes.